Welcome to the On-Premise IT Roundtable podcast, the only show that dares to be both on topic and on location, or on-premise and on-premises. Each time we meet, we bring together a group of IT luminaries to discuss a single concept or premise. In this episode, we're talking cloud. And what we're going to say is, frankly, nobody cares, it doesn't matter, and the cloud's just going to disappear. We'll talk about that more in a second, but first, let's meet our panel.
Marina Ferreira. My Twitter handle is _ Marina LF.
Glenn Deckhazer. My Twitter handle is gdeckhazer.
Chris Grundeman. I'm on Twitter at Chris Grundeman and also chrisgrundeman.com.
I'm Patrick Hubbard at Fervent Geek.
So here's the thing. Does anybody really want cloud, or do they want what cloud does? And if they really want what cloud does, then is cloud even a thing that people are going to buy? I think the premise of this episode and the premise of this discussion is that, people really don't want cloud. They just want services. Patrick, I'm going to throw that to you to kick this thing off. Make your case.
Okay, so you look at the early days of cloud adoption, right? A lot of developers had been frustrated by sort of the slow pace of IT, or it takes a long time to get something into production, or visualization for performance was a problem. And so for them, cloud represented this great set of manicured APIs and then infrastructure they didn't have to worry about, and they could focus on doing what they wanted to do. Now, we had late adopters that sort of said, oh, this is fine, we'll just lift and shift, and all of the other things that resulted in cloud not being less expensive, or maybe it was less secure because they didn't really know how to manage it. And so for them, cloud, in a lot of cases, became this negative thing. It's like, oh, no, I don't want to have to deal with that too. And then they had hybrid IT as part of the mess, when really, to your point, what they really wanted was an abstraction. They wanted a set of APIs that they didn't have to worry about, and infrastructure underneath it to focus on development.
I think to that point, if you look at the beginnings of it, the cloud has never really been a thing. It's just computers being operated by someone else. It's an outsourcing function.
MSP.
Absolutely.
The cloud is just somebody else's computer.
Exactly, with someone else running it, which I think is an important part. And now we're talking about things like cloud-like, and it's been wound up in this whole idea of DevOps. But I completely agree. I think what people want is for things to just work and to have the ability to set performance requirements, latency requirements, know what the performance they need and want, and put things in those places so the workloads work the way they want them to work.
Well, I think that if you're referring to infrastructure as a service, everything you guys just said was spot on. But once we've got past that infrastructure as a service layer in time, what we've seen is that the cloud vendors, both AWS and Azure, have really put forward a plethora of value-added services, the platform as a service approach, which does so much more than simply provide API-based performance characteristics. And so it's gotten to the point where businesses are solving their problems, such as data warehousing, such as authentication, such as content distribution, and these are not instances of compute or network. These are whole business solutions that are being delivered on demand, at scale, highly available, secure, still API driven, and it's even driving more than just the infrastructure players out of the game, and it's completely overturned the entire industry.
So I just believe that some companies today, they are being born in the cloud. So there's no such a thing as the cloud's going to disappear, because that means company might disappear as well. There are companies out there, for example, Seamless or Grubhub. Those companies, they're born in the cloud. Some applications are born in the cloud, so there's no way that's going to disappear. That's the first thing I want to say there. I'm a huge believer of the consumer base or consumption economics that we have out there. And I don't believe only Azure or AWS or cloud or Google Cloud. There's more out there. And it's going to be more and more and more.
This is maybe more of a semantic argument, but I mean, at some point, when you look at things, right, when things are new, we need to name them so we can talk about this new thing. And next generation gets worn out. So the word cloud is better than next generation data center or next generation outsourcing maybe. But eventually, it just becomes the way things are done. So I actually think that those cloud native companies, right, companies that are being born in the cloud, and once you have enough of those, as well as enough of the existing kind of legacy traditional companies that have now moved over and moved their applications, refactored things into the cloud, if that's just the way we do things, will we still refer to it as a cloud, or will that just be IT?
Now, I think we're going to talk about in the original question of do they just want services? Marina's point is completely valid. Where you have these new companies are coming in, they're not necessarily putting up instances, infrastructure as a service instances. They're going to Workday, they're going to NetSuite, they're going to Office 365, and they're buying outcomes by the user by the month. And that's not even, there's no infrastructure involved. It's simply, as long as they get their internet connection, a laptop, they go to Starbucks, they got all the applications they need, and they're buying it per user per month. For once they get a little bit more mature and they start developing their own applications, they're doing it on a platform as a service approach, whether it's with the Cloud9 IDE, for instance, at AWS, whether it's using RDS, whether and all the variants therein, whether it's using SageMaker, and I'm just throwing out these kinds of services that are really layer 7 solutions that are just taking over the world, and then so much stuff is being done in there that I don't even think we even see the tip of the iceberg on this stuff. But does that mean the cloud is going to disappear? So all of these are services, and they're delivered as a service, whether it's a software as a service for these young upstarts, or whether then we go to platform as a service. The infrastructure as a service is what I think we call it classic cloud, because it referenced these resources in a clouded type of, a big circle that we didn't own. I like to differentiate that from SaaS and PaaS, because I think those are different animals.
So it's almost the marketing expression cloud just sort of disappears, and we just assume that it's a common set of services. Especially you look at what Azure's doing right now, where they're getting into the real difficult sort of meat of enterprise. I mean, they're not really even calling it transformation or kind of application deconstruction anymore. Now it's application modernization. It's softer. It sounds nicer. It takes away any bad previous early experience with maybe some lower performing enterprises with cloud, and instead it just turns into snap-ins into Visual Studio. You don't really know. You're an enterprise developer focused on what you're really essentially doing, what would be, FAS or serverless, but instead it's like, it's data. Well, where is it? I don't know. It's just available, and I push this button and I can see what the cost is going to be per month, and management seems to be okay with that. And of course, it's all cloud, and it's selling and really ramping up the adoption of Azure services, but it's sort of taking away any of the overlapping pre-existing ideas about what cloud might be, since so many different companies have kind of set their own definitions to drive people towards specific services.
And let me take that too. So this is exactly where I'm trying to go here. We could easily have a funny argument, a semantic argument about, I just mean the word cloud is going. But let's push it a little further here. And where we're going to push it to is maybe what we know as cloud really is dead. I mean, if you think about, what are people buying from, all those people that are buying things from Amazon, right? All those people that are buying, services from Amazon, or trying to build themselves a, quote, hybrid cloud infrastructure, or VMware, trying to push out, hybrid cloud. That's all about infrastructure and platforms. Infrastructure, cloud infrastructure. Is cloud infrastructure a thing that exists in 5 years?
I would love to. So if you notice what Amazon does, once people start doing bespoke things repeatedly in the EC2 environment, you'll find very soon Amazon comes out with a PaaS offering that does the very same thing with automated scaling, multi-region, high availability, and zero management. When that happens, you no longer need to use the infrastructure as a service. So what Amazon is becoming a value-added PaaS provider in that case. And so the more times they do that, the more use cases they take out of the infrastructure as a service realm, the less that infrastructure as a service becomes a thing. And they keep doing this, and because they keep doing this, Azure will keep doing this, Google will keep doing this, and that's what's going to drive that industry, is all this value-added stuff. So not only don't you need infrastructure administrators any longer, you now no longer need database administrators, Hadoop administrators, because it's all being done and masked, and Amazon, Azure, Google, and the other providers to come are doing that, and that's where that market's going to be defined. That will be cloud in the future. This other stuff is going to be irrelevant, because you're never going to even think about infrastructure as a service when you're just buying your outcomes.
Yeah, exactly, buying your outcomes. And to Marina's point, every company is cloud native now. Every young company. I used to always say that, if you were going to start a company today, let's say you're going to start a company that sells, I don't know, shoes over the internet or something, right? Is your first thing going to be, well, we need to go, invest, hundreds of thousands of dollars in servers and switches and build a data center? And no way, right? I mean, that's what you were trying to say, right? Every company is born in the cloud.
And even the companies, the tech companies out there, that they're huge hardware vendors, they are switching their business, their strategy. They're moving to a more of a software company, just because they want to adapt and make their products available anywhere, especially on the cloud. So there's also that's happening right now. The existing traditional companies moving to the cloud as well.
Well, and how much of that is really sort of best in class as a service, right? An example of that would be Office 365. When I talk to other admins, in general, most of them say, everything seems to actually be better. My Outlook seems to run better now that we moved everything off of on-prem into O365. I don't want to say into Azure because it's not quite exactly the same thing. But what they're really doing is just seeing what it would be like if they had a Exchange expert on site who could really make it work well, right? So Salesforce, to your point, is another one of those examples. Like, how many businesses for years had these incredible, bespoke, IBM custom-built CRM solutions because that was the secret sauce of their business, and they decided, you know what, this other thing's 90% close enough, and I can adapt my business to it. And then you get the added benefit of you can hire someone off the street who knows how to use Salesforce in your environment, and then they're available. You look at some of the strategies to have, going back to kind of an API economy, that is, if you have it, if something's running on-prem, or it's running in one, if you're multi-cloud or serverless or whatever else, once you become able, and maybe you were cloud native to begin with, but once you begin to be really comfortable with those tools, it doesn't matter where it is anymore. And so you're thinking that makes it easier to maybe push things back onto prem or onto really specialized clouds, or does it continue to consolidate under brand names that are basically buy us and you'll feel better, or this brand name is less is going to be easier? Like you see the AWS partnership with VMware now, right? Is that to add a enterprise name to a AWS service that makes people feel comfortable, or is that an enabling technology?
I mean, I think that's more about feet dragging, right? I mean, somebody who, if I know how to do it, it's almost like the CLI argument, right? If I know VMware and I'm unwilling to look at this new AWS thing, then having VMware there, I think it's more than the brand name. I think it's the way that it works is familiar to me. I think that's interesting. But you both make a really interesting point, which is if you've taken this thing to the service level, where you've got your Salesforce or your Office 365 or your G Suite or all of these, like I said, best in breed services, then maybe you don't need the infrastructure as much. But I guess maybe my question there is, the timeline and maybe the ability of customization. I mean, is that really the ultimate endpoint, right? Is that the maximal result, or are there always going to be pieces and parts of IT infrastructure across the landscape that need something specific, right? So we're doing a lot of, edge things now, and I think that word is the next kind of buzzword, but really moving things closer to users to get latency things down, whether or not we'll see actual VR, AR happen, IoT processing closer to the home. I mean, are all of these things going to eventually be services that don't need individual managed infrastructure, or do we, is that what we're really saying? Is that all of this will go to services?
It's funny, listening to what you just said, I feel like we need to create a new data OSI model. It's like we had an OSI model for networking. We need a new OSI model for data, because even saying layer 7 doesn't matter anymore. I think a Salesforce is a layer 7 application that's cloud-based, and we call that SaaS. And then we have platform as a service, which is maybe layer 6 or layer 5 now, and then we have infrastructure as a service, which is maybe layer 4 or layer 3, and then the network, and then back to the endpoint, which maybe is the new layer 1. I'd love to see a model come out with that, because it'd be a lot better to describe, when instead of calling it cloud, we could say, oh, that's a layer 6. Layer 6 is out there, and layer 5 and down is back home, right? I think it'd be a lot more descriptive. I think we need to come up with a model for that.
Well, that's interesting, because especially in the case of where cloud really ends up coming to you. Going back to the VMware example, right, where the first launch was RDS on VMware in your data center. You're going to care about that somewhere in between. I don't have to deal with it. The cloud is the biggest MSP anyone's ever seen, and it's traditional infrastructure in my environment that I have to take care of. So making that portable, making that easier, being able to have those different layers as a way of describing those parts where the overall complexity is much, much higher than it might be, or at least there's levels of abstraction that are being projected into your data center from that cloud provider, it might make it a lot easier to have those discussions as you're trying to implement and manage that.
Yeah, I think that idea of the it wouldn't be the OSI model, but the model for cloud services, I think is really interesting, because one of the
Called
things
the CSI model.
CSI model
No, that's not so good.
might be problematic. But there is, if we had this idea of the CSI model, one of the things the OSI model allowed us to do was create protocols that allowed interconnectivity between different things, right? So if you look at the internet, is a fundamental success of being able to have this model, this layered model, and we could have protocols that talk to each other across the same layers, but they had lower layers to take care of that. That's actually really interesting in the idea of federating services to create my IT environment based on a bunch of best-in-breed services. But if I knew where they fit into that and how the data portability would work and had containers to move things around in, that'd be really interesting.
Yeah, I think the model already exists. It's just we need to I think we need to more kind of just notice it and identify it and define it. But the VMware thing, I think, going back to the idea of VMware, that being put into AWS, I think is more a response to how do I get legacy workloads into the cloud, because the cloud, as it did in infrastructure as a service, wasn't meant for those kind of workloads. But I think that's even more of a point why cloud, as it stands today, will disappear, because the future workloads, all future workloads, per Marina's point, all new companies don't have infrastructure. You start a company, you don't even think about it. You're getting your SaaS services, and eventually you're going to use your PaaS services. Maybe you need something like your own servers, but nobody really wants to do that anymore. Which will go to a future topic is, do we need Windows anymore? That's another topic. But as we go forward and all those new companies start creating all those new workloads are there, up in the cloud, in SaaS and PaaS, the legacy workload inventory is going to come down. They're not going. It's going to take a long time to get rid of all of them. There's some, manufacturing, healthcare. They're really slow to let go of their old workloads. But as the newer disruptors come out, none of them are doing it that way. So that's why I think the VMware in AWS is, while it's necessary today, 10 years down the road, I don't see it as, you're not going to go look for that as your solution. You're going to do it somewhere else, and it's going to become unnecessary. So maybe the cloud will disappear because it's unnecessary.
Yep. You just need to have the bare minimum for you to sustain your business, and then just use the cloud as a business enabler for you.
So I'm going to give you guys a chance to have a last word. Anybody want to say, and basically just quickly tell me the answer, okay? In your opinion, is cloud as a marketing term going away? And is cloud infrastructure, cloud platform, basically, where does that line come that is no longer relevant in the future? Okay, so you see where I'm saying there? Okay, so Patrick, what do you think?
Obviously, infrastructure is not going to go away, but it definitely gets to be a lot fuzzier about where workloads actually are and where data is stored. Cloud as a marketing term, I think absolutely goes away. And like Vogel's reInvent 2017, he has throwaways that you should listen to. And one of them was, just before he walked off stage, he said, it won't matter anyway, because in a few years, you're just going to write business logic. Well, really, that's the whole point. And so if you as an enterprise are thinking about that, just the logic that you need, and you've abstracted away all the mechanics, even above containers that are actually a part of that deployment, cloud doesn't matter anymore. It's just the services that are being offered and how much does it cost.
Chris?
Yeah, so I think they are actually interrelated. I think that cloud as a marketing term hopefully will go away. I don't know that the half-life on those are pretty long. But if everything, it works cloud-like, right? Once cloud is everything, then cloud has disappeared, essentially. So I think they both kind of go hand in hand. Even though we'll still work with things that are what we're calling cloud now, that'll just be the way it is, which is not cloud anymore.
I think cloud as a marketing term from the beginning has actually slowed the adoption of cloud in general. I talked to so many different customers that say cloud is a bad word, but if you'd have called it infrastructure as a service to begin with, they would have adopted it a long time ago. So I can't wait for the word cloud to go away, because I think it's a very confusing term, and at this point it's become meaningless anyway. So I think that software as a service, platform as a service, infrastructure as a service, function as a service, we didn't discuss that at all. I think that's that's another interesting topic. I think that's much more descriptive, and I believe that they point to different strategies of implementation. So I like where the nomenclature is going, and I think that nomenclature will stay around for a long time, with the software as a service, platform as a service, and function as a service continuing, infrastructure as a service shrinking as a direct consumable to businesses.
Last word. Marina?
I think the name cloud's probably going to take some time to disappear, the name, but what is behind is not going to disappear. I think the consumption model is going to continue to grow, but the name is going to take some time, a few years to disappear. That's the name. It's there.
Yep. I agree. I feel like, eventually, instead of calling it cloud computing, we're just going to call it computing. So the cloud, solved. The cloud is going to disappear, or at least, quote, cloud, quote, is going to disappear. We've reached a conclusion. So thank you very much for having this discussion. Thank you for listening to the On-Premise IT Roundtable podcast. If you enjoyed this discussion, remember to subscribe, rate, and review the show on iTunes, since that really helps our visibility. And please share this show with your friends. This podcast was brought to you by GestaltIT.com, your home for IT coverage from across the enterprise. For show notes and more episodes, go to GestaltIT.com/podcast. Thanks, and we'll see you next time.